Welcome back. When you think of Planned Parenthood, you think of women's health care, birth control, abortion, hormone therapy for the transgender community. Not so much until now, but that's changing. Planned Parenthood is now offering hormone therapy for those transitioning, whether becoming a male to a female or vice versa. That includes teenagers with parental consent. And as you just saw, not everyone agrees with it. So joining us for more is Nathan Brummer, Executive Director of Also Youth, Heather Aisling, a licensed counselor and specialist in gender issues, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. And Rod, let me start with you, because my question to you is your objection, the age in which young people could go to Planned Parenthood for hormone therapy, or just that anyone could go there?
No, not anyone. If you're an adult, you make decisions for yourself. It's youth that I have the concern about, particularly teenagers. And I wasn't clear on it in the package right there, to be honest, exactly where the cutoff is with Planned Parenthood, so I'm sure Nathan can clear that up. But I would be very concerned about 14, 15, 16, because having 8 children, I know what 14, 15, 16-year-old decision-making capabilities are, and sometimes they are rash and they're foolish, and we understand a lot of the brain development and what causes that and goes into it. I'm very concerned about young people in that age bracket making life-altering changes to their bodies that may very well be apparently irreversible later in life if they change their mind. I don't think that's something we should be encouraging. Clearly, the package suggested somebody that wished it had been otherwise, but I think as a broad policy culture, that's not a good idea.
All right. I'm going to quote right off the Planned Parenthood webpage. In order to receive transgender services, you need to be 18, capable of providing consent. If you're 17, you need a parent or guardian to accompany you for appointment. If you are 16 or younger, additional paperwork is needed. I would imagine that's your understanding. But let me ask you to Rod's point that young people are not old enough and mature enough to make those decisions for themselves.
I disagree. I have seen a number of kids over the course of my 10 years working with the trans community, and these are smart, intelligent kids. They're often a little more sensitive than the average population, which I think serves them well in life, but unfortunately can be very hard when they're growing up, when bullying and all these things are apparent. But these kids do not make this decision overnight. They don't wake up one day and say, hey, I think I would like to be in the opposite gender. It is not how this works. There needs to be more education around what this really means. This is not getting your nose pierced. This is not getting your hair dyed. This is something they've really had severe contemplative thought and process time into. It wouldn't be something anybody would do off the cuff, because it's just too controversial and it's too there's too much discrimination around people who do. So why would anybody want to just get on that boat, because it's a trend?
Nathan, let me ask you this. From your observations and your experience in this, what role do parents usually play in terms of children who may be interested in doing this? How involved are they? Does it vary from family to family?
It absolutely varies family to family. Planned Parenthood is requiring parental consent depending on the age. Honestly, there are a lot of parents that aren't willing to acknowledge or accept their gay or transgender children, and so they wouldn't be afforded the opportunity to even participate in Planned Parenthood's programs. Often the alienation and the rejection from families is one of the key reasons we see young people running away who are LGBT. So that the family, the parents, that it matters a lot.
Rod, you heard what the retort is to your concerns. What do you think?
Well, I think part of it, the problem is that it would be for both of them, that if you have, and it was said in the package also, that depending on the study, between 70 and 90% outgrow it as adults. This gender dysphoria, gender confusion.
That's for children. That's not for adolescents and above, actually. It's just for children.
So give me an age for above when those studies would not apply.
So we're talking about when you reach adolescence, 13, 14, 15, 16, those people do not, decide to revert.
We are obviously just getting warmed up. We'll have much more on minors transitioning at Planned Parenthood right after we check the first weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about hormone therapy now being offered at Planned Parenthood for those transitioning, and joining us for more is Nathan Brummer, Executive Director of Also Youth, Heather Aisling, a licensed counselor and specialist in gender issues, and Rod Thompson of the RevolutionaryAct.com. Heather, I have known families who are dealing with children who have questions about their gender, and I know that they love their children a great deal and want to do the best for them, but I can imagine there are a lot of parents who would handle a situation like that differently.
Absolutely, absolutely, and they do. You know, it's about education. And I run a loved ones group for trans moms, dads, people who are parents to transgender individuals and their partners. And I find that once they get into that room and get surrounded by that support, get their questions answered, you know, there's some psychoeducation that goes on, it does a lot to allay their fears. They've got to do the research, they've got to get the information. There's a lot of mythology around what this really is. There's a lot of mistaken ideas about what this is, and I think we need to have education first and foremost. That's the most important thing. But beyond that, yes, of course they're going to have, this is their child. They're going to want to know, you know, what, you know, you don't want to subject your children to things that could harm them. But I promise you, the harm is coming from not having access to HRT for a lot of these kids, because the dysphoria is ridiculous. It's just off the charts, and that causes suicidality. I mean, this is a population that has 10 times the average for rates of suicide. It's really an epidemic here.
Nathan, let me ask you this, because the doctor in our story said that he does not know a person who has started and changed their mind. Is that anecdotal, or is there science and research to back that up?
No, there is research. I can't unfortunately quote the studies, but that is research-based for sure. I think the other thing that's important to note that you know, Planned Parenthood offering this care has been offered privately through physicians for a very, very long time. What Planned Parenthood is doing is providing access in a community that hasn't had that ability or that access, affordable, excellent health care, and that's an important thing through their 11 health centers. Folks have been leaving this area and going to Tampa and Orlando for hormone replacement therapy.
Right. So, and Ron, I do have a question to you, but I also want people to know, therefore, where is the money coming from? Obviously, you know, Planned Parenthood's funding has come under the microscope, you know, in terms of abortion and so forth. But when it comes to this kind of service, where is the money coming from through Planned Parenthood?
Well, I know they accept a variety of insurances. I don't know, I mean, I don't work for Planned Parenthood, so I can't speak to that, but I know they get funding from a variety of sources, but they are taking insurance as well for this particular care.
Okay, so Rod, here's the question to you, and if you had a child, you could pick whatever age you want, that is expressing gender identity issues, and you're taking them to counseling or to medical professionals or whatever, what would you do?
Oh man, that's a pretty major what-if situation there. I'm pretty sure I would want them to wait until I thought that they were at a mature enough age that they could make a decision, and a well-informed decision, outside of all that goes on in a teenage mind. I mean, whether it's the brain development between, you know, the amygdala, you know, and the prefrontal cortex. We know that the amygdala, the emotion one, is more developed among teens. They tend to be more emotional. This is obvious in our observations of them. I would want to wait till we got past those times that they could make a decision. I understand that sets in place certain physicalities then that are set in place because they've already developed.
But let me ask you something that Heather mentioned, that the rates of suicide among people who are having this kind of inner battle are incredibly higher than your average adolescent.
Absolutely they are, and I believe the studies show that the rates of suicide among transgendered adults is also higher than the national population. I think that's also true of gay adults in the adult population. You can attribute that to a lot of things, but clearly all of these are issues that are well outside the norm, so that makes it difficult in fitting in. That's obvious.
Heather, let me give you an opportunity to respond to that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that trans people in particular, because we're focused on that, we're talking about a lack of resources, first of all. There's so much discrimination across all boards. We've got healthcare discrimination, school discrimination, jails discrimination. They see so much discrimination, all the way up to murder. I mean, we're really talking about a population that is so vulnerable to abuse, aggression, and up to murder. We've had 4 trans women already killed this year. That's why they have those high suicide rates. It's because they're not accepted by society, and they're not given adequate health care, adequate resources to deal with this. So
Nathan, let me ask you this. If this service is offered to teenagers as young as 16. I don't know how the paperwork that Planned Parenthood is talking about. If it became the norm that these services were available, do you believe that the rate of suicide would go down?
I think eventually, yes. Hopefully that would be the way that would happen. But this process, even with Planned Parenthood, requires some hoops. So if you're 16 and under, you have to have a letter from a therapist that you need to have seen for a certain amount of time. You have to have an endocrinologist also on board. And so it isn't a fly-by-night, tomorrow I'm going to walk in. I mean, it takes often years of process to get there before they even can be served by Planned Parenthood, who also has then their own evaluation criteria. But eventually, yes, I think what we need to see are a lot of supports put in place and an awful lot of education, but yes.
Rod, I know you want to
Yeah,
say
I just
something.
wanted to mention that the United States Endocrine Society has said that they do not believe that you should be doing gender transformation treatments to children under 16, and those are also the same standards that are in place in the UK, in the Netherlands, and Australia, some countries that are really on the forefront of this issue. So it concerns me a little bit when you have that much saying not under 16, that Planned Parenthood with some extra paperwork and a parent's approval would still do it for under 16.
Well, Heather, I guess we, from that point of view, that we need to separate what Planned Parenthood or anybody else is doing in terms of the age and in terms of, Planned
I
Parenthood.
think we also need to question, though, his research, because the American Medical Association and the American Psychological Association and ACOG, I don't know the association you just mentioned at all. All the major medical associations absolutely agree with this treatment plan. So I want to make that very clear.
For what age down to?
All the way through. I don't know what association you're mentioning.
The United States Endocrinology Society.
Yeah,
And the medical community, just to put a little subnote into that, it has been slow to this whole process, as the medical community often is with these things. There's a lack of education there, a gross lack of education. It's now just starting where they're training med students on this stuff. So there's a gap in knowledge here, and that's part of the problem, I think.
Well, this was an issue that was up for debate before Planned Parenthood got into this line. So the question is whether this kind of service and therapy should be offered to people who could only afford to do it, and is Planned Parenthood serving a community that otherwise may not be able to afford it?
Possibly. The National Center for Transgender Equality, I assume that's a real group, said that sex change treatment is paid for by tax dollars when medically necessary. So that'd be Medicaid money when, quote, medically necessary. I think that that's something that if that happens, and if that happens at Planned Parenthood, that's something that the public really ought to know is happening.
Right, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So Nathan, to the people who are watching this right now, what is the one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation?
I think the most important thing that all Americans can appreciate is we all deserve access to affordable, adequate health care, and this is a life and death situation for many young people. It is a sound medical decision made through a long conversation with parents, and it's a private medical decision. And I support Planned Parenthood offering this service. It's been needed, and I'm grateful they're here.
Heather, I would imagine that a lot of families would come at this from very different points of view. Mm-hmm. And you see it all.
Yeah, it often has a lot to do with culture, with education, with what their conservative or not conservative political beliefs are. A lot colors this, but what we're talking about at the end of the day is a child who is suffering greatly. And the truth about this is there is a biological imperative to this without getting too detailed into it. But the genitals develop in the first trimester and the brain in the second. And between those two things, a lot can occur. There can be different kinds of hormone washes that can make the brain feel it is one gender versus what is the sex or what is determined to be the sex that's assigned at birth by the doctor, okay? And because of that, look, if this was diabetes, would you deny your child insulin if they were suffering? There's great suffering here, and it can easily be righted often with medical transition. Not always, but often.
So Rod, you've heard the arguments. Does that change your point of view at all?
No, I have all the compassion in the world for a young person that's gender confused. I can only imagine how frustrating and upsetting that would be on a regular basis. But I'm not sure that we aid that if we too soon allow them to make life-altering decisions that are irreversible later in life, that set them on a path that maybe they would not have chosen.
Okay, we have to leave it there, but before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about Friday's show on The Week in Washington. 14 teenagers were shot and killed at a Florida high school earlier this month. There were also 3 faculty members killed. Now lawmakers are brainstorming ideas like banning assault rifles, raising the age to buy a gun, and arming teachers. We went to Facebook to hear what you have to say, and Jacob says required written approval from medical doctor providing mental stability, raising gun purchase age to 21. Thank you, Rick Scott, and ban all assault rifles. Angle says so much for arming teachers or having cops in the schools when even a licensed officer wouldn't risk his own life to stop the madness, and the teacher would probably shoot a student by accident. This country has a gun problem, point blank. And Pete says you can stop there at the Constitution, where it establishes, quote, my right to keep and bear arms. Hey, Pete, you're correct. You have a right to bear arms. But the U.S. Supreme Court and the late conservative Justice Scalia said, be specific, quote, like most rights, the right secured by Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever for whatever purpose. If you're going to cite the Second Amendment, you probably should be aware of what the highest court in the land has to say about it. If you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired. Just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Nathan Bremer is the Executive Director of Also Youth. Heather Eslin is a licensed counselor and specialist in gender issues. And Ron Thompson is with the RevolutionaryAct.com.